Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the next edition of the Junction City News. I am very excited about this late April topic that we are talking about. I've got Gabby Stevens here with me from Champlain Chittenden Solid Waste District, and she is going to be talking with us about compost. So really excited about getting started. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so just going to go through some questions here. Can you talk with our viewers today about composting?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are native Vermonters, they're probably already well aware that the universal recycling law is in existence. Act 148 was passed unanimously in 2012, and it took full effect in 2020. So right at the height when everybody was at their craziness.
Yeah, right.
But what the law essentially does is it bans certain materials from the landfill, namely food scraps, leaf and yard waste, and certain types of recyclables. So the reason why we ban these kinds of materials from the landfill is because there is only one landfill in the state of Vermont. And that landfill is estimated to have about 20 years left before it becomes completely full. And then there's nowhere else for it to go. So the law was really intended to save space in that landfill for all of the non-recyclable and non-compostable items. On top of that, over 50% of emissions from American landfills is caused by food waste breaking down. So keeping that food out of the landfill really does prevent a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and it has a really big impact, even though it might not feel like it does. So it's really important that we kind of take that into consideration, and that is why we compost.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That is super helpful. Thank you. Okay. So how can people get rid of their food waste if they're not allowed any longer to put it in their regular trash?
Yeah, so there are a lot of options. Fortunately, you can't throw your food waste in the trash, but what you can do with it is you can have a caller come pick it up. You can compost it yourself. You can get a solar digester for your backyard. That's an option too. You can donate your food. That's always the best option, is feeding hungry mouths before you go ahead and put that compost in the earth. And you can even feed it to animals. There are certain animals that it's okay to feed your food scraps to. So it really just depends on what works for you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about these options. How can folks successfully backyard compost?
Yes, so there are a couple of steps if you want me to break it down. The first step is to collect your materials. So an easy way to think of composting is like cooking. You have a recipe that you need to follow. It's 3 parts browns to 1 part greens. So there's only really 2 ingredients involved in the composting process. Greens are the most common item. That's what we think about when we think about composting, because that's what people are trying to compost to get rid of. Your greens are going to be your high nitrogen materials like food scraps, your green yard waste like green grass trimmings and green leaves, and that's all going to be mixed into the compost, but it's only going to represent about 1/4 of what you're going to put in your total bin. The browns are the most important, because without browns, you're not actually composting, you're just letting your food rot.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very important that you add those browns. And your browns can be anything like straw, hay, sawdust, wood chips, brown leaves, really any kind of material that's dried out so that only that carbon is left. So it's always a good idea to have a big store of that carbon on hand, and also to keep your food scraps in a safe place in your kitchen or in your fridge to avoid fruit flies, just as long as you're not leaving uncomposted food scraps outside.
Okay.
After you collect those materials, you're going to want to select a container, and again, you have a ton of options when it comes to selecting your container. Some people prefer to just go to their local garden store and buy a container, which is great. Some people like to have tumblers, which basically is a different way of accomplishing the same goal, which is getting compost. And some people like to DIY bins, which works too. I mean, a DIY bin is just as good because you don't really need anything fancy to make compost.
Okay.
The only thing that's important to note with choosing a bin is that it needs to be at least a cubic yard, so 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet.
Okay.
And that's just so that you have enough volume for that compost to really heat up once your bin is full.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also you want to make sure that you're composting in some kind of a container. Experts or people that really manage their compost in a particular way, they might have an open pile, but for the average composter, you're going to want something to protect your bin from pests. So having some kind of a rigid container helps a lot. Okay. And where you want to compost, choosing a location is also important. Not as important as you might think. There's a common misconception that you want to compost in a sunny area so that your compost gets nice and hot. Yeah. But actually, all of that heat from your compost pile is coming from the bacteria that are breaking down your food scraps and working really hard. So whether it's sunny or not doesn't make too much of a difference. Okay. What is important is that you're keeping your food scraps away from your house, your shed, your garden, anywhere where you don't want critters getting in. Yeah. Critters love compost. Even the best managed compost piles may attract a few curious animals. And while they're generally not going to be problems, you always want to make sure that you're keeping that as far away from your living spaces as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Next, you want to build your pile. So I like to talk about composting like a recipe. If it is any recipe in existence, it's probably lasagna. Because you're going to keep building those layers up. Layers of browns to start, then your food scraps, then more browns, then more food scraps. And burying your food scraps deeper into the pile is also a big help. You really want to surround with all of that brown carbon-rich material and not leave any of your food scraps exposed. That's why we say layer it as much as possible and don't let huge clumps of food scraps exist within your pile.
Okay.
Yeah. Another way to discourage insects from your pile is to make sure that you have a bin that will sufficiently cover and keep those layers intact. So something that I always suggest is adding hardware cloth, a 1/4 inch hardware cloth to all sides, just to kind of hold it together. And if you do that, you really shouldn't have too many issues. I always say start a pile with your bin completely empty, probably around late fall, because that's when you have the most leaves around, so free carbon, it's all right there. Yeah. And then you also have the most wiggle room to get through the winter, because your pile is going to freeze. And so you want to make sure that you have as much space as possible. And then you just want to leave it be. There's really not much you have to do. Nature's been making compost for ever, and so there's really not a lot that you need to do to get involved in the process. If you see certain indicators that your pile might be a little out of balance, if it smells, if it's attracting animals, if it seems really wet, that might be a good opportunity to add in more browns and just give it a quick turn. But you really don't need to turn it more than, let's say, once a month. I happen to know people who turn it once a year, and as long as it's not giving off any signs that there's something wrong with the pile, like smell or animals, that's perfectly fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then last, you're just going to use it. You can use your compost at literally any stage of the growing process. Seedlings love it. You can put your transplants in it. It's amazing for making compost tea, which is great to water your indoor plants. Yeah, there's so many different options. You can even use it as top dressing if you want. And some people like to make their top dressing compost extra pretty by running it through a strainer or a sieve that they make themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, pretty simple, just 6 basic steps and a little bit of notes here and there, but it can really be as hands-on as you want it to be or as hands-off as you want it to be.
Okay, great. I did, I think it might be later in the slides, but when I was looking at these earlier, I was curious because we've got nothing but oak leaves on our property, and I saw something about oak leaves potentially not being the best brown to use. Is that...
Yeah. So there are some plants that are toxic to other plants. And the thing with backyard composting is your compost pile is never going to heat up enough, or the average compost pile is never going to heat up enough to kill things like pathogens, weed seeds, plant diseases. So you always want to be careful and acknowledge that what you throw into your pile might stay there. That's why even things that are treated with pesticides should be kept out of your compost bin. So yeah, if you know that you have a plant that could be potentially toxic, it's better to exercise caution and just leave those leaves where they are and compost some other browns.
Yeah, all right. Great. Okay, so what should residents not compost?
Yes, so when you're choosing to backyard compost, you're a little bit limited in that you're working with a pile that's not going to get up to, let's say, over 130 degrees for a long period of time. So that being said, it won't break down things that could potentially be harmful, and it may also attract pests. So avoiding things like meat, chicken, fish, bones, very fatty foods, foods that contain high quantities of dairy. I said compost is like a lasagna, but maybe don't throw a whole lasagna in your compost bin. Human waste, pet waste, things that are treated with pesticides, coal or wood ash, things like that you might want to avoid putting in your compost bin, either because they will attract pests, they won't break down, and they could be potentially harmful to the plants that you're spreading that compost on.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So animals are always a concern when composting. You touched on this a little bit, but how can people keep animals out of their compost bins?
Yeah, there are, critters love compost. That's just my slogan. Anytime you give them free food, it will attract them. But the response to that is, don't give them free food. Make sure that you're covering it with a thick layer of browns. You really can't go wrong. You can't add too many brown leaves.
Can't go wrong with too much.
Absolutely not. You can throw as much in there as you feel is necessary, and if your compost pile is a little dry, it's okay. You'll probably produce enough food scraps to manage it. But there are other things that you can do as well. Making sure that you have a very durable bin that's wrapped in that hardware cloth is a big help. Avoid foods that are particularly smelly. That's why we say no meat, fish, or bones. You can also give your compost bin a turn if you notice that there are signs of animals kind of going in and around your actual compost bin. And if it becomes a persistent issue, it's okay to take a pause on composting and just start taking your food scraps somewhere else for a little while. That's all right. As soon as the animals learn that there's no food for them there anymore, they'll move on and it won't be much of an issue. Something else I will want to note is make sure that your bird feeders are taken down in the winter. That's a big one that I'm sure everybody's heard before. If your bird feeders are taken down, maybe check around to see if everybody else in your neighborhood's bird feeders are also taken down. Because once you have animals in your area, they'll start looking for food elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Where can people find out more information about composting?
Yes, we have a website, cswd.net/composting has a lot of great information on how to compost, what to throw in your compost, and it's a really great resource for anybody that's looking to learn more or teach themselves the composting process. We also offer workshops. You can check our calendar on our website to see if there's any local workshops nearby, but if there aren't any, I would highly recommend that you go to your local library, for example, and just ask them if they can reach out to us, because we're always putting on workshops. Our public outreach coordinator, Kat Moody, does a fantastic job. We've also got Rhonda, who goes to schools to teach kids about composting, and I work with businesses. And if you already have a compost bin and you're just looking to troubleshoot a few quick questions, I highly recommend UVM Extension's Master Gardener hotline, because master composters work there as well or volunteer there as well, and it's just a hotline that you can call all throughout the warmer months and just ask questions, ask an expert questions, which is amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. So if backyard composting is not available, where else can folks get rid of their food waste?
Yeah, it's definitely not an option for everybody, but you can absolutely have your food scraps picked up. We have a list of haulers on our website that you can call to see if they will come and collect your food scraps. If not, you can also go to any of our drop-off centers and Green Mountain Compost, our organics recycling facility, and take your food directly there. And then, like I said, feeding to animals is also a great option, and donating food when it's possible is a really, really great way to make sure that you're feeding hungry mouths rather than just wasting that.
So, since for folks who might compost in their backyard, but they can't put meat or bones in that.
Yeah.
So are these essentially the same options? Like, so even for folks who are backyard composting, this is what you would do for your meat and your other things that you shouldn't put in the compost?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't compost that material in your backyard, you can definitely take it to a drop-off center. In some examples, you may be able to throw it away so long as you're composting everything else. Okay. But I will add the caveat that everything has to go somewhere. So putting that food scrap in your trash is not really going to be any different than putting it in a curbside bin. It's just a different location. So if you find that you're having trouble with animals attacking your curbside compost bin, for example, you might have that same problem even if you're just relocating it to a new place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. But I will just say composting is as easy as you want it to be, as low cost as you want it to be, and it can also be the opposite. What's really important is that you're throwing in the correct ingredients to get that whole recipe together. You need to have 3 times as many brown materials as you have green materials. So 3 times as many leaves and hay and straw and sticks as you would have food scraps. And you really want to make sure that if it's a consistent problem for you, that you have pests going and bothering your bin, that you say, okay, I'm going to make the decision to temporarily pause composting and move my food scraps elsewhere. Because that's really going to be what will make the biggest difference. But every little thing that you can do helps a lot.
Yeah, that's
it
great.
It really does.
Yeah, and especially you listed off those great reasons why we're composting at the beginning, which I'm not sure. I know I definitely don't think about all of those benefits at the front end when I'm thinking about this. So that was really great. Yeah. Okay, anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add one more thing if we have a little bit of time.
Sure.
Compostable foodware and cutlery is a big question.
Yeah.
And I don't touch on that as much when it comes to backyard composting, because really you can't throw compostable foodware in your backyard compost bin. Biodegradable and compostable are not the same, but in general, both of those kinds of products are not made to break down in your backyard bin. Okay. So that's something you want to be aware of. But even if you are taking your food scraps to a drop-off or you're working with a hauler, in Chittenden County, you can't throw those materials in with the rest of your food waste.
You can't?
You cannot.
Okay.
Yep.
So they should be going in your regular trash.
Yep. It's a common misconception that you can recycle them or compost them, but really, unfortunately, compostable plates, cups, cutlery, that all goes in the trash.
Okay. And just to make myself feel better and maybe the residents, does it essentially break down faster than other products in the landfill? Or is it not even?
That is such a good question. And I have not great news.
Okay.
I can't say no.
Okay.
Because yes, the products will break down in general faster than they would a plastic counterpart.
Yep.
However, we have pictures and we have experiments and examples of carrots, for example, that have sat in a landfill for 10 years and still look almost like they did when they were thrown in there. They're a little black on the outside, but it looks clearly like a carrot, and it's still fresh and orange on the inside. And so there are a lot of different reasons to use compostable products that are single use, but I will say if a carrot won't break down in a landfill, it's a lot harder for these biodegradable alternatives to break down in a landfill as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, in some cases, depending on the brand, it might require less resources to make, which could be a reason.
Yep. Right.
But it depends. It depends on what the product is, who's making it, and it won't take no resources, because even to make those products, you need water and you need energy. So it's a complicated question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but that's good to know, because I think I definitely have been confused what to do with those things.
Yeah,
so
it's not easy, and it doesn't make it any easier that it's called compostable, because you see compostable and you think, oh, I know what to do with this.
Right.
And that's not the full story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it actually reminds me of another, we've also spoken with our wastewater treatment facility operator here, and another kind of product that is advertised a certain way is not necessarily workable, are flushable wipes. They aren't actually
That's
flushable.
a really good comparison, and I wouldn't have even thought of that.
Yeah.
Both drive me nuts.
Right.
But yes, absolutely.
Same thing. Okay, awesome. Well, this has been really very helpful. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't have anything more to add, but just if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me or to any of the outreach staff. Our phone number is on our website at cswd.net. So yeah, if you have any questions, we love questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. So we hope everybody will join us next month for the next Junction City News. We're hoping we'll be able to talk about the strategic planning process that the city has been doing. And if anybody is catching this live, it is the 29th of April, and we have the second vote for the Essex Westford School District budget on May 7th. So you can come get your ballots at the clerk's office if you'd like. They will not be mailed individually unless you request that. But otherwise, you can vote on May 7th at the Champlain Valley Expo, Blue Ribbon Pavilion, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that's it. Thanks so much.